Good afternoon, everyone. As usual, I'm just going to give a couple of seconds to allow you guys to come in before we start the business of the day. But before then, I just want to ask each and every one of you, even as you guys keep coming in, how has your day been? Those at work, this is 3 p.m., most people close after 4. And I doubt if we have people that, well, no. We do have people that goes for break at 3 p.m. So this goes to those on break, those caught up in traffic, and those that are trying to wrap up, the business of the day. How have you guys been? And those at home, shout out to you. How have you guys been? Today is indeed a great day. We will be having a podcasting on audio or video. Choose your podcasting part. I can assure you guys that it's going to be interactive. It's going to be fun. I just want to urge you guys to take your time and come up with one or two questions, and I bet you our speaker will definitely nail it. Okay, I can see we've got quite a number on my list here. We'll just start even as people keep coming in. Good afternoon once again. For those of you guys that are joining us for the first time, my name is Gagba Esehaya, and I'm the training coordinator of the Temple Small Business Development Center. The Temple Small Business Development Center helps small businesses start and grow. We offer free one-on-one consulting and a variety of low to no-cost webinars. We are proud to be part of the nationally accredited network of the Small Business Development Center, which has over 1,000 networks across the United States. We are here this afternoon, like I mentioned earlier on, for a podcasting series. A copy of the PowerPoint and a link to the recording will be sent to all the attendees. As usual, being a webinar, all the attendees have been muted. However, we always encourage you guys to drop your question on the Q&A or the chat box. Without further ado, please allow me to welcome our wonderful speaker, even as he takes over the floor for the presentation. Mr. Steve, you're welcome.
Thanks, Garba. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. And welcome back to session 3 of our program on podcasting for business. Today, we are going to be talking about how do you decide whether you do your podcast in audio or video? And it's a really good question. For most people, a podcast is an audio file. When people think of podcasting, they think audio automatically, but it can be video. As we've said in earlier sessions, the purest definition for a podcast is any rich media content, and it's either audio or video, that's delivered using the RSS feed technology that was developed by Dave Weiner and the podcast VJ, Adam Curry from MTV. So it can be audio or video, but depending on which one you choose, there are different considerations that you have to keep in mind. First of all, I think the most important thing is, what's the goal of your podcast? If your goal is to engage people in listening to a story or listening to an interview with a very exciting guest, but you're not going to be showing them something, you're just going to be talking about things, maybe audio is your best bet. If you have a complicated visual, like a working model of some kind of device, or an interesting location that you want people to see, then maybe you want to think about doing video. In either case, there are time and budget considerations that you have to take into account, and we'll talk a little bit about those and then talk about some of the tools you can use whether you go with audio or video. Just a quick comparison, from the ease of use standpoint, audio is probably the easiest thing to produce. I mean, we all are accustomed to writing documents that end up being on the web in some form, whether as a blog post or as an article that you post on LinkedIn or somewhere else. But audio is pretty much the easiest thing beyond just typing something. And that is simply, pushing the record button and recording your thoughts or recording an interview with somebody. You don't have any real wardrobe considerations, as most of you who've done any kind of Zoom calls wearing the Zoom shirt from the waist up. You don't have to worry about your wardrobe if it's only an audio call, and some people turn off the cameras when they're in those kind of calls. You don't have to have special lighting for an audio podcast, but you can't show people anything. As I mentioned, it's not intended for showing people objects unless you have a guest who's really good at describing things to people. Audio is probably not the best medium for something that's complicated to look at, or you need to see it to understand it. If you do go with video, it is more complex. It needs more planning. How your hosts look on camera is going to be important. And that means good lighting, good cameras, thinking about the location you're in. All of those things matter. And more important than anything else is it needs to have something visually interesting. Many people go to video, and there are literally thousands of podcasts where people have planted cameras in the studio and they have guests talking to each other, and they show the video of the people sitting there talking to each other. And lots of us like to watch panel discussions, and it can be interesting if the panelists are engaging, but that's kind of a waste of video for the most part. We've all been doing it. We're all taking part in Zoom calls and going on gallery views like this, like the one that you're on now, where you're actually just looking at me talking, with a little bit of speaker support in the graphics here. But there are ways to make this kind of video look a little bit more interesting. And a couple of the ways that you can do that, and this is also good for audio as well, is to use one of these platforms that have emerged for people to easily record interviews with remote guests. So on the screen, on the slide, you see two video platforms that are really quite good. We've been working recently with Riverside.fm, but a similar opportunity, similar platform is Iris.fm. These are platforms that allow you to bring in guests remotely over video. They just click on a link and it opens in their browser, and to record them in the cloud. And the advantage of doing that over some of the platforms where you actually have to connect with people directly is that your recording isn't going to be dependent on the signal, the bandwidth of the Wi-Fi signal that the person has at their location. Too often people assume that they can broadcast video over Wi-Fi, but when it gets to the receiving end, it's very degraded and it's stuttering or it's flickering or pixelated, and you don't get a really good recording. What these platforms allow you to do, and at the bottom center of the screen is cleanfeed.net, which is an audio platform and does the same thing for audio, is these platforms record each individual guest in their local computer and periodically upload chunks of that recording to a cloud-based storage system. So the advantage you get is you're getting a recording that's being made locally, and then that local recording is uploading to the cloud, so that when you're done with your program, when you're done with your interviews, you press stop on the recorder, it finishes uploading, and then you, as the editor, the host, download those files, and you have very clean, locally recorded files to work with, and usually very high quality video and audio, assuming your guests have been using decent equipment. And we'll talk about equipment in a couple of minutes. But the important thing to think about with these platforms, they do a little bit of the tricks of video editing for you. They can put the people into the gallery view. They can do a little bit of limited switching of people from one speaker to another, but you're never going to get the precision that you would get by learning how to edit video in a video program like Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve or one of the other video editing timelines that the pros use. They give you all the kinds of special effects you would need to switch between cameras, to put graphics on the screen, to intersperse pre-recorded segments. And one of the things that can make these kinds of programs a lot more interesting is if you have a guest who's talking about some visually interesting place or thing, to have them record some video of that place or thing prior to the interview. And then when you're doing your post-production after the video interview is done, you can put that visual imaging on the screen while the person's talking. You don't just have to have a bunch of talking heads. And it makes it a lot more interesting for your audience to look at, but it can also make it a lot easier for you to do some edits. If you need to cut out sections of the video interview, you're not going to have those obvious edits visible to your audience if you have some other video to lay on top of the screen, so that while the person's talking, there's something else going on visually on the screen. That's the remote kind of platforms you would use for video. If you have the ability to set up a studio, you have a much better chance of doing something a little trickier. If you see the picture at the bottom of the screen, that shows you our control room. It's a little bit of an old picture. We have a little bit more different equipment today, but gives you an idea. And the double pane glass looking out into our interview area. And as you can see, we have a chroma green wall, which we can use to layer in special effects, as you see in the two pictures at the top. We've been able to take out the background and add in a TV studio background. And we're using animated backgrounds like the one you see behind me today, so that it gives the very subtle impression of being a live picture. It's not a static image. And the other thing that you might want to think about not using is the automatic virtual background setting if you're using Zoom as the platform you're going to be recording on, because those kinds of virtual backgrounds look a little cheesy. There's not the clean separation between your image and the background unless you use a green screen, and we can talk about that a little bit. If you're doing audio, you can capture sound at the location of some interesting event or topic. I guess I'm going to jump around out of order here. But one of the things we have done is go on location and talk to people on the site where the event is taking place. So, for example, in this case, doing some news reporting, I'm at the scene of a Carvana, one of those car vending machines that Carvana advertises, which was built a couple of years ago in Philadelphia, and it's visible from Interstate 95, which rises as an elevated highway not too far from that location. But the idea of being on site and getting pictures of it that could actually be used in the report makes it a lot more interesting than just talking to someone about, hey, we built a Carvana vending machine. Similarly, the three guys at the table at the bottom, they're attending a conference, and you pick up the sound of the conference as well as the conversation going on amongst us. And it's always a good idea, whether it's audio or video, when you go to a location to do interviews, to capture some of the ambient sound or even video scenes of the location that you can use as covering shots in a video. That's called B-roll. It's called, in the radio business, they call it room tone. It's the sound that exists without the people talking. And you can layer that in the background and make it sound very immediate and very present, like you're on location. I talked a while ago in one of our earlier programs about audio podcasts being done by a priest in the Netherlands, Father Roderick, who was doing a podcast for several years called The Catholic Insider, and was recording with a stereo recorder while he was interviewing people in Vatican Square the night that they were electing the new Pope. And the audio that he captured, because he didn't know this was going to happen, was an accident, but it was a fortuitous accident. He captured audio at the moment the white smoke came out of the chimney and people started cheering that a new Pope had been selected. But because he was recording this audio from Vatican Square in stereo, if you listen to it with headphones, you really have a presence. You really have a sense of feeling that you're there and you're actually on the scene. So that kind of audio and that kind of video can be really, really important to capture if you're trying to do some storytelling. If you're doing video storytelling, you know, again, it's not just interviewing the talking head. In the upper left-hand picture, I'm interviewing the developer, the redeveloper of the former Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey, which, by the way, any of you who are watching Severance, the new thriller, science fiction thriller series on Apple Plus, you'll see some of Bell Works because they used it as the exterior of the corporate headquarters of the very evil, sinister corporation in the show. And this is inside Bell Works as it was being redeveloped. This was a very huge facility with an enormous 4-story indoor atrium, but it doesn't really tell the story unless you actually physically are there to see it. In the upper right-hand corner of this slide, you see a gentleman with his hand extended. He is actually an architect and a feng shui master. And in a very interesting instance where they were building an apartment complex that was targeted at people from Asia who were interested in properly positioned apartments, they hired this architect / feng shui expert to ensure that the angles and the spaces were properly done in the building. And he conducted a feng shui ceremony at the building, and this is him demonstrating what the components of that ceremony would be. And right there, he's throwing some colored rice in the air. But he explains the whole thing as we walked through the property. So we have images of the furnishings and the design of the property, along with him doing the feng shui preparations and the ceremony. And it makes for a much more interesting video than if we were just showing him sitting at a table talking to me. At the bottom, I went on location at a home in Fort Lee, New Jersey, that had once, it went up for auction a few years ago. It had been once owned by the notorious mobster Albert Anastasia, whose picture you see in the little inset, the black and white photo there. Anastasia was the head of what was called Murder Incorporated. He was a killer for hire for the mafia in the 40s and 50s. And he owned this house. It was later owned by the comedian Buddy Hackett, and it was owned by Del Webb, the casino entrepreneur, before it ended up in the hands of a fellow by the name of Arthur Imperatore, who was a developer in Weehawken and Bayonne, New Jersey, and also the developer of the New York Waterways ferry system. The house went up for auction, and it was a great opportunity to actually see the inside of the house. As luck would have it, there was an old newsreel of the house when Anastasia actually lived there, and I was able to incorporate that newsreel footage to show the yesterday versus today aspects of the house. And I can share the link with people if they're interested in watching it. It's on our state broadcast news website. But, you know, again, seeing the house and having the auctioneer who was selling the house explain the furnishings, explain the features of the house, while you're looking at the features, was far more interesting than just seeing the house or seeing the person or hearing the person without any other visuals. As I said, you know, I guess at the risk of repeating myself, you know, Zoom panels or panels like this are okay, but it's not as interesting to look at. So if you're ultimately thinking about doing your podcast as a panel of people speaking, or just 2 people speaking, or 3, you may not need the video. And of course, it's less complicated to do, and it's going to be a lot easier to edit. Let's see. So we talked about streaming radio. I don't want to talk about that. I'm going to turn off the sharing for a few minutes and just see if see what we get here in the chat. So we have a question from Regina. Regina wants to know if you get more people responding or attending videos versus audio. If you are doing recorded podcasts, the tendency is people want to listen to it while they're multitasking. So you're not going to get, let me rephrase that. People want to do something else. People don't want to be tied to the computer screen. So if the subject matter, if it's appropriate, audio is probably the best way to go. You're going to get the greater number of people for the most part, unless you have a really, really interesting video. If it's just talking heads, go with the audio. Because they can be on a treadmill, they can be on their bikes, they can be driving. We don't want people watching video while they're driving on the Schuylkill Expressway in Philadelphia. So, you know, that would be my guidance. It would be to go with audio rather than video. I think that, you know, people ask, how long should a podcast be? And we've gone the gamut from 1 minute up to hours. And there are some very popular podcasts that go for literally hours. We don't advocate that, but you know, 25 to 30 minutes seems optimal. And remember that people can always push the pause button or the stop button and come back to it at another time. So it's not necessarily about the length, it's about the level of concentration and how tied to the device people have to be. If it's a video, they have to sit there and watch it. If it's audio, and that's probably suitable if they are, you know, commuting or on a plane or sitting at home. But if they're out and about and they want to consume the content, audio is going to work better than video. I talked earlier about the idea that you should have good equipment for these kinds of things. I just want to show you a couple of things you can do to really spruce up your your video at a relatively minimal cost. And so just bear with me while I bring up a document. This is a document that I prepared for some clients with some of the tools that we recommend that people use. If you have a computer that's more than a couple of years old, you may not have a high definition camera built into the computer. Laptop cameras are not always HD. It may be worth investing in an external camera like the Logitech C922 that you see on the screen. This one is high definition. As you can see, it's got a little hinged clip that fits over the top of the laptop screen. It'll work on a monitor in a typical, you know, desktop computer as well, but it may be a little too high. You always want the camera to be as close to eye level as possible. You don't want to be looking down or, you know, looking up if it's a very large monitor and you've clipped it on the top. There are booms you can get that will put the camera in front of you or hang it from the screen so that it's hanging at eye level like mine is right now. Another thing that's really important that people don't often take into account is lighting. I currently have 3 LED lights from a professional video lighting kit going right now. One of them is lighting the green screen behind me so that I get a nice solid chroma key capability to put that background up, and that's why it looks so real. But you don't need that. You can go with a light like this on top of your screen to provide just enough light to fill it out so that your face pops out from the background. Too many people rely on lighting of the room, which is often not the right color temperature is the term that's used in video production. It's not bright enough and it's not in the right place. When you're using a computer or working at a desk, you typically have the light coming over your shoulder towards the desk where you're working. And what that's going to do is that's going to go into the lens of the camera, whatever camera you're using, and the camera is going to make an adjustment because it thinks the scene it's looking at is too bright. So it's immediately going to close down and your face becomes much darker and the background behind you becomes blown out and there's no detail visible. Where you really want to have your camera is directly in your face behind the camera. The lighting, I'm sorry, should be behind the camera, coming directly into your face. And that's what lights up your face and fills out the shadows so that people can actually see you. The other thing that's really important is the microphone. Too many people in interviews, whether it's Zoom or whether it's a podcast or a video recording, rely on the built-in microphone in the computer. And as we've said in earlier webinars, that's really not a good choice because that microphone is very often too close to the cooling fan in the laptop, and it also picks up a lot of echoes from the room. What you really want to do is get some kind of a microphone whether it's a lavalier mic like the one I'm wearing now, or a boom microphone, which can come in from the side. And I can just turn the camera a little bit so you can see it. You can see this is a boom microphone here. Something that you can put much closer to your face so that the sound that's going out into the platform is mostly your voice and not the echoes of the room. And that's a real important thing to think about. And then another thing to think about, of course, if you have an Apple computer, you have other issues because the newer models of Apple computers tend to not have a whole lot of jacks where you can plug in accessories. They have standardized on this Thunderbolt jack, and you may need an adapter to use with a microphone or with earbuds if you don't have the right kind to plug into that Apple computer. This is a typical kind of earbud. This is a relatively inexpensive one. There are more expensive ones you can get, but the basic idea is to not be monitoring the sound from the other people on the podcast through your speakers. The speakers tend to cause noise cancellation technology to kick in, and that will make the recording sound bad. It just adds all kinds of artifacts. And so what you really want to do is have the sound that you're listening to going into your ear and your speakers muted when you're having the conversation with your other guests and co-hosts. And so, and then the final thing would be, if you want to use a virtual background, don't use the virtual background feature in Zoom or any of these other platforms without having a green screen behind you. And this is a green screen that goes right on the chair. I don't have the other photo, but it basically has straps that go on the back of your chair and gives you a green frame around you. I'm currently using a green screen that's on a stand, so it's a much larger green screen than the one in the picture you see, but it's the same concept. You put the green screen behind you and you use the technology within your video software to take that out. And the reason we use a green screen, it could also be a blue screen. Chroma green and chroma blue are the two terms that are used in the industry. The blue screen tends to be used in movies, I don't know why, and the green screen tends to be used in television. Both of these colors are colors that are supposed to not exist in the natural world. And so when you tell the software to take it out, it doesn't remove any colors from the people or the objects in the room. And that works great unless you're wearing a shirt that has green in it. And occasionally, if you want to look on YouTube, you might see some green screen videos with the Queen of England, because she has a chroma green dress that she tends to wear sometimes. And people have had a lot of fun with that. And I think the former First Lady, the wife of the last president, also wore a chroma green dress at one point, and people had a lot of fun extracting the dress and superimposing animated videos where her dress should have been. So you get the idea that you can do a lot of tricky things with green screen, and you can put multiple people at desks and things. But again, that's very complicated for most of you kind of stuff. It's not the kind of stuff that you're likely to want to do for a casual podcast. So, so those are things that, and what I'll do is I'll share this document with the Small Business Development Center, and they can share it with you, and it has links to all of these items, and you can go on Amazon if you think you want to use them and buy those items, and then kick your video podcasts up to a higher level. I want to take a break and see if anybody has any more questions to ask. Okay. So when you're producing audio podcasts, which, you know, will be what most people do, having at least one microphone is good. And if you have multiple guests, you want to have a microphone for each of them. It's a good idea to have some kind of a recording device, whether it's your computer or a digital recorder like the ones I talked about in earlier webinars, where you can record each person's microphone on a separate track. And the reason we do that is so that in the editing process, if someone talks over someone else, you can digitally separate those tracks so that you can preserve the conversation in a way that's understandable to people. They're not muting each other out or garbling each other's responses or comments because they're talking over each other. You can actually separate that out. It's a little trickier to do if you're all in the same studio, because if you have multiple microphones open, even if you have separate tracks, there's going to be some what we call bleed through. And you have to do some silencing on one track and enhancing on the other track to make sure that you separate them properly. And that's, a skill that you can learn. And there are hundreds of YouTube videos about how to edit multi-track audio. But also you want to think in terms of the clarity and the pacing and things like that. Most people want to know if they can use music for a theme song for their podcast. And the answer to that is maybe. If you have a favorite song that you have loved since college and you can't wait to hear on the radio, no, you just can't use it. Music on the radio, anything that you would buy on a CD or in any kind of a commercial recording, is copyrighted, and there are complicated releases that are needed for those kinds of recordings to be used. If you try to use that kind of music in an audio or video podcast and then put it on YouTube, you will get a copyright ding, it's called, a strike. And depending on the licensing for that piece of music, they may mute your podcast or they may take it down. And if you do it too many times, they may kick you off of YouTube. What you want to do for music is look for something called royalty-free music. And when you look for royalty-free music, you want to look for music that's called buyout music. And that the difference is there are people who sell musical compositions to be used in productions like podcasts or TV and radio shows, where you pay a fee for each time you use it, and you have to keep track of how many times you use it. That's kind of complicated, and it's labor intensive, and it's expensive. So what you really want to do is find music that you can purchase one time, where the license is unlimited and you can use it as much as you want. And that way you don't have to worry about your music most of the time. Now, the problem with royalty-free music in a podcast is, say you put your podcast on YouTube, and a lot of people do this, by the way. They will take an audio podcast, add a picture to it or a graphic, and make it into basically a video slideshow with only one slide. So when you click play, you see a video, but it's just a static picture. They'll put that on YouTube because someone told them that YouTube is a great search engine and you should put your stuff on YouTube. The jury's still out on whether putting your podcast on YouTube is the best way to get visibility. But if you do, and the music is royalty-free music, sometimes royalty-free music is sold to multiple publishers by the composer, and they sell it, they sell licenses to you and me under different names. It's the exact same piece of music, but it's got a slightly different name, and there are multiple publishers with a copyright claim on it. So occasionally you'll buy a piece of royalty-free music, put it on a production on YouTube, and you'll get a notice that someone's claimed a copyright. And what you have to do then is challenge it and show them the proof that you have a license for it, and the claim will go away. But you have to be sure you keep those documents, make sure you keep track of all the music you've licensed, so that if it does happen to you, you know what to do with it when it does come. And the same thing is true for video. There are a number of sites where you can license all kinds of video for special effects and things. Stock video, if you need video of doctors urgently walking through the halls of an emergency room, or if you need video of a helicopter landing on the roof, or just scenic video of a particular city, there are places where you can buy that. And very often it's cheaper to buy an annual license for the entire site, and then you have access to all of the graphics that they make available for as much as you want. So you have to decide how much of that you're going to use. and budget accordingly. But typically when we work with clients, we'll help them identify a piece of music they want to use as a signature theme song. And then we basically kind of put that music aside. We have so much music available under the licenses we currently pay for that putting aside one piece of music for one client it isn't a problem. And we only use that music for that client. So that's a way to do that. Fatima's asking about the other webinars. I'm going to let Garba give her some information. The Small Business Development Center can give out the links for the other webinars in this series. I don't have them at my fingertips.
Oh yeah, just a quick one, and they are all on our YouTube channels.
Oh, okay, great. So if you go to the SBDC YouTube channel, you should be able to find that.
Yes,
great.
Please. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see, what else can we talk about? Audio and video. One of the big things with audio versus video is you don't have the same what's called in the business continuity issues that you might have with video. So what that means is if you record a segment and you stop and then you begin recording again, when you put those pieces together in post-production, you want everything to look like it was done in a single session. So that means if you had a half a cup of coffee on the table, and when you stop tape, you filled a cup of coffee and it's now full, you have to watch that because people will notice that the cup of coffee was half empty when you asked the previous question, and now all of a sudden the cup is full, or there's a half-eaten piece of pizza, and now it's a full piece of pizza because you took another slice. We've even had cases where we recorded with people and tried very hard to keep that continuity, but we missed one where in the finished product we had a person come up to read a passage of text and go away, and then she came back 10 minutes later wearing a completely different dress because we shot on 2 different days and forgot to tell her to wear the same dress. So those kinds of things you have to watch for in video. Obviously, you don't have to watch for them in audio because if you start recording on Monday and you stop and then come back to it on Wednesday, as long as you're using the same studio and the same microphones, it's going to be hard for people to tell that you didn't do it all at the same time. A lot of radio programs are produced that way, so audio has that advantage over video. Lighting is always a challenge in video. If you start at one time of day and then you stop and come back at a different time of day, the location of the sun is going to change if you're outdoors. It may change the way the shadows fall on the walls if you have a window in the room where you're recording it, if it's inside an office. You need to be sensitive to those things. It's always best to try to limit the amount of outside light you're using if you're indoors, and also to be mindful of the time of day if you're outdoors. Camera positions are also important, and where people are standing. So if someone is standing in a particular location, when you tape the first part of their comments and then they go off camera and come back, you want to make sure you have that spot marked where they were standing so that they can stand in exactly or close to exactly the same spot. Otherwise, the edit is going to look strange. And that's where having the B-roll video of other images comes in handy, because you can do that transition more smoothly. It's less noticeable if you have some covering video before you go back to the second cut. Trying to think what else we might talk about here. You're welcome, Fatima, who thanked us in the Q&A. The vast majority of podcasts, as I said, are audio podcasts, and that seems to be the most digestible form for most people, but it doesn't mean that it can't be interesting. You can always make it interesting. You can use some special effects, ambient sound from the topic that you're talking about. If you're talking about going to the boardwalk, you may need to go to the boardwalk and record some audio there. And again, the more presence, the more realistic effect you can give to it, And that's where having a portable audio recording device comes in handy, particularly a stereo recording device, because a lot of people listen to podcasts with earbuds. And the more you can make them feel like they're really in the environment that you're creating for them, the better that's going to sound. The same thing is true for video. You want people to see something interesting. You want them to hear something interesting. And again, it's about storytelling. Don Hewitt was the executive producer of 60 Minutes for many, many years. And when his reporters were stumbling and having a hard time, he would remind them of the 4 key words in video or audio journalism: tell me a story. And to the extent that you can tell a story and paint that story with sound and pictures, you're going to have a more effective production. That doesn't mean that, you know, the talking head audio interview or the talking head video interview should never be done. It's just that that's not the only thing. It's you're really only limited by your imagination and by your technical capabilities. And as far as the technical capabilities go, you know, we're all learners. This stuff is not new. It's new to a lot of us. I didn't start out as a video producer. I started out doing audio as a radio broadcaster back in the 1970s. I had to relearn all this stuff in a digital era. And I had to learn the video stuff very quickly because people started asking for it. It's something you can acquire. You just have to have the time and the interest. But, you know, even without spending a lot of time, I think you can produce some very, very good, very effective kinds of conversations that share your knowledge and share the knowledge and expertise of the people you interview. But the key, I think, for everyone, at least on these webinars, is how do I use this to advance my business? And if you're trying to advance your business, the ultimate test is if it moves the needle on the behavior of the target audience that you're trying to reach. So if you're trying to demonstrate to people that you have expertise in a particular kind of business product or service that you want to sell to them, that means showing off your experts, letting them explain the project, the process, the problem, and how you address the problem. And you know, to the extent that you do that, you're going to give people a good sense of what your expertise is and whether or not you're the person to solve the problem for them. And it creates a halo of goodwill. Again, you know, having audio and video on your website is it's catnip to the search engines. Google does like audio and video, and particularly if you do it on a regular basis, it does get you higher rankings in the search. And it will help you when people are trying to find solutions to the problems that they're trying to deal with. So I encourage you to think about it. Think about what kind of storytelling you want to do. Think about how to structure your podcast. And it can be multiple, you know, it doesn't have to be one person for an entire half hour. It could be a series of shorter interviews or a series of conversations or people telling about what they do in the environment that they do it in. So if you have a manufacturing plant, maybe you go to the manufacturing floor and you talk to people at different stations about what they do and how they do it. If you have a business that has a research lab, you talk to different researchers at different stations. It all depends on what your topic is and what you have to work with. But again, I'd say use your imagination. It's like having your own radio station or your own TV station. And how do you want to program it? If you're going to do video in the field, there are a number of options for low-cost video cameras. The most obvious one, of course, is to use your smartphone. Both Android and iPhone smartphones have the capability to be used for short clips of video. You have to be careful because it is a drain on the battery. So you make sure your phone is fully charged or you have a charger with you. And for heaven's sakes, whenever you're making videos, hold your phone the long way. People watch videos in widescreen, even though you see a lot of videos recorded this way because that's the way people are accustomed to holding their phone. This is the way people like to look at videos at home. And if you don't hold it this way, then you have two big black bars when you put it into the standard HD frame. and you have to do something with those bars. And you frequently see that when people send video of a traffic accident to the local newscast, they put some kind of a screen behind it that puts in a magnification of it. Just doesn't look good. It looks much better if you give people a wide view of what they're looking at, and put your speaker either on the left or the right side of the screen and let people see what's behind them a little bit more. Linny is asking, do you advise people in the form of a class or webinar, those who choose to dabble in amateur video producing, just a quality cell phone or real pro equipment? Again, people are shooting feature-length movies using iPhones, and that can be done. It doesn't have as much flexibility as if you use a professional or semi-professional camera. There are some really good quality prosumer cameras. In fact, I use a couple. They are not terribly expensive. You can get them for under $600 these days. You do want a camera that has, some capabilities, so that you can adjust the settings for different lighting and different types of things that you might be taking video of. If you want to do slow, high-speed photography to get a slow motion effect, there's that to consider. There's a number of different things that you could use. I'd be happy to give people some recommendations if they like them. Do I teach a class or course on podcasting? Of course. Just get in touch. We'll be happy to do that. That's a great question. What was the camera name again? I didn't name a camera specifically. What I'll do is I'll share some recommendations for cameras with the Small Business Development Center, and they can include that in the handouts that they send you. Because we have a couple of cameras that we use. We're currently using a Sony NX70, which is a higher end prosumer camera, almost a broadcast quality camera, but not quite. The broadcast quality cameras tend to be very expensive. They tend to be, in the tens of thousands of dollars and up. You're probably not going to need that. You can get by certainly with a camera in the 600 to 2,500 range, let's say. And as you go up to 2,500, you're talking about cameras that people are using for documentary production and things like that. But you can certainly do a lot with a cell phone camera. You can really get quite a lot done. But don't forget to have microphones. There are adapters you can get that allow you to plug in microphones like lavalier mics into the cell phone and put them on your subject while you're recording with them, so that you get good quality sound. Because the distance that you need to hold the camera from the person to get good video is precisely the wrong distance for good audio. So you want to have that microphone close to them. And that might mean having somebody else recording the sound separately with a microphone on a boom pole, and then you synchronize it when you get the audio and video back to the studio. And there are ways to do that. That's why you have the slate in movie production when they go action, and the slate goes down. They use that to synchronize the sound with the video. And it's even easier to do with digital audio and video today than it was back when they were doing it with film and magnetic recording tape. So there's lots of different ways to do that. But getting good sound is almost more important than getting good video. People will forgive video that's a little bit borderline, but it's really hard to listen to an audio interview for any length of time if it was recorded badly. So if it has scratchiness, if it has noise, if it has buzzing, you want to get something better and record it again. That's just it's gonna turn people off, and that's not your goal. Your goal is to engage your audience. Your goal is to get them to learn more about what business you're in and what services you provide and how you can help them. That's what a small business podcast should be about. And you would not use a box of crayons to draw your logo on a piece of paper and say, this is my letterhead. So we would encourage you to not use amateur tools for your audio and video. It's just as much a representation of your professionalism and your business as your logo and your letterhead. So don't leave it to the amateurs. If you have the desire to learn and kick up your skill set, go and do it, but make sure that what you come out with, the output that you put out there, is something that you're proud of and something that reflects well on your business, because you certainly don't want something that reflects badly and turns people off. And with that, I'm going to pause. I think there's one more question. Let's see. Video should be shot horizontally or vertically. To clarify, once again, the way most people hold their phones is like this, straight up and down. This is the way you hold your phone when you're using it. This is not the way to hold your phone when you're shooting video. When you're shooting video, you turn the phone 90 degrees to the left. And the reason I say 90 degrees to the left is because the camera tends to be at the top of the phone. When you turn it to the left, the camera's at the left, and the controls for the camera are at your right hand. So, you know, that to me is the more comfortable way to do it. Obviously, if you're left-handed, you can turn it this way. But for any video that you shoot on your phone, you should always try to shoot this way. I know there are people who think that there is a market for vertical videos shot this way. There may be, but the vast majority of videos are intended to be watched on a screen at home. And you can still turn this when you're watching a video. If you haven't done so, you know, when you're watching a YouTube video on your phone, click the button at the bottom of the video to make it full screen and then turn it this way. And you can watch it, and it's a much more pleasant experience to watch it on a full screen than to watch a tiny little square that's been sized because you're holding the phone vertically. So I would definitely recommend that. Another question from Fatima, should I get a wireless lapel mic or wired to connect to the phone? If you get a wireless, there are a number of kits you can get now. And again, I have mentioned them before. There's a company called Rode, R-O-D-E. And I just put their URL in the chat. The O in Rode has a Scandinavian slash through it. But the company makes a wide range of tools for podcasters, including a range of microphones, both wired and wireless, and in particular now with adapters that are designed for smartphones. You know, it used to be that you had to throw a bunch of things together to get an adapter that would plug into a smartphone and allow you to use a wireless mic. They now have wireless mics that work quite well with smartphones. They do a great job of it. As I mentioned in an earlier one, Rode has a podcaster's interview kit that consists of two lapel mics that plug into an adapter that goes into the Thunderbolt jack of the iPhone. And there is a free app that you can download that works directly with that adapter set, putting each mic on a separate recording track. And so you have a great little interviewing kit right there in your pocket with your smartphone. As long as you remember to bring the mics with you when you go out. A book or an author for the purpose of brainstorming for engaging content ideas. Wow, I don't have one off the top of my head, but I would say, you know, anyone who can focus you on figuring out what your mission is and what you're trying to accomplish in your podcast. And again, I'm making an assumption that because this is a webinar series sponsored by a small business development center whose aim is to help small businesses grow and thrive and prosper, the goal of your podcast, whether it's audio or video, it seems to me ought to be to focus on helping people learn about your expertise. Again, it's not a commercial. If people see a commercial and they're, you know, if you go to a lot of websites, you'll see a video and companies will say, we've just done our video. And typically they've hired a commercial production house that is, you know, in the business of making TV commercials to sell products. And what they end up producing is what looks like a commercial. People turn those off. The minute someone senses that your video or your audio is trying to hard sell them, we have the best claims agents, we have the lowest premiums, we're wonderful, we're friendly, we have a great mascot. People don't want that. What they want is to hear you tell them how you solve a problem. And they're looking for solutions. They're looking for someone to help them with their business, the same way you're here looking for me to help you with your podcasting. So, I would encourage you to not do those kind of audio or video, but think about what are the things that keep your customers awake at night that you help them with? What are the things that they say, wow, you really helped me with that. I never could have gotten it done without you. And those, to me, are the topics that you want to focus on. And who are your experts in those topics? And how do you get them to talk about those topics in a way that resonates with your clients or customers, where the customer says, that's what I want to do. That's what I need. And I have to get in touch with them. That's really the bottom line for business podcasts. You're not looking for going viral. If you're lucky and something funny happens, great. But the goal of this is not to go viral. It's not to get 1 million views on YouTube or 1,000, 10,000 followers on Twitter. It's to get people that know your business or have found your business to appreciate your expertise and do business with you. And that's the success metric in my mind. If you only get 100 people listening to your podcast, that may not be because it's not good. It may be because there's only 100 people who need what you do. And if 10 of them call you and do business with you because they heard your expertise in the podcast is doing its job. So try to suppress the urge of your social media consultants to make you go viral or do cute things on YouTube, unless you have some real gimmicky thing like the blender company that did the series of videos, Will It Blend? And they threw all kinds of things in their industrial blenders. That's great fun, and that gets them a lot of buzz, but that's, not for everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steve. This goes to my attendees. A couple of minutes ago, I posted a 30-second survey about today's webinar. Remember, we at Tempo SPDC, we always cherish your feedbacks, even as it helps us to improve on the services we provide to you guys at a low cost. So kindly take 30 seconds of your time to help us to fill out the survey link I posted. I don't know, because from my side, I can see on the chat box, Mr. Steve, you've actually nailed all the questions that came up on board, and the Q&A section too, you've actually nailed everything. We are left with like 2 minutes before we wrap it up for the day. But even as before we do that, I just want to use this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for keeping it a day with us. Thank you for your time. I love the interaction. I love all the questions that actually came up on board during the presentation. Mr. Steve, thank you so much for everything you did today. I did say at the beginning of the webinar that today is indeed a good day. And I promise you guys that it was going to be fun. And of course, I can attest to which the presentation was awesome. Yeah, Sean, thank you very much. Just a thank you message that actually come. I don't know if you have any concluding comments, before we wrap it up.
I think I'm good. I appreciate everybody's attendance. I put up some contact information on the screen. Don't forget, we've made available a coupon code for my book, The Business of Podcasting, for all the attendees of this webinar series. So if you just go to thebusinessofpodcasting.com and use that coupon code, you get $5 off on the book. And there's also a lot of other useful information, some interviews and some checklists about podcasting, and we hope that we are being helpful to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Steve. Thank you, everyone, for keeping it a day with us once again. Do have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Yes, please.